Ladies and gentlemen, well, gentlemen, because let's face it, if you're as much of a theory cell as I am, there are some female theory cells of the, let's say they have a few personality disorders. Anyways, before I offend everybody, I have an exciting new content update podcast announcement. It just dropped. I recorded this, I think, last month. My good friend Will, his No Future podcast, he specifically invited me on to talk about something that we are both intimately familiar with, and he just didn't have the right guy to do it. I am the right guy. We did a deep dive into the aesthetic theories of Francis Bacon, but we reviewed the book Francis Bacon by none other than Gilles Deleuze. And in it, I highly recommend, it's going to be down below in the link, of course. I highly recommend everybody listen to the podcast, then go and get this book. Francis Bacon, The Logic of Sensation by Gilles Deleuze, of course. This is, I think, one of his only main works of art criticism. Kind of philosophy in general. Has a reputation of also diving into art criticism, especially literature. But theory cells themselves have an absolute terrible reputation with handling art and art criticism. But Gilles Deleuze is different, of course. And in my opinion, if you listen to the podcast, we go through everything from various concepts present within the corpus of Deleuze and Guattari's work, from the early publications, Logic of Sense, then Difference and Repetition, up until Anti-Oedipus and 1,000 Plateaus. I think if you really truly, and this is something that theory cells don't know because they're terrible when it comes to art and art criticism, if you truly want to get an in-depth look, a simple conceptual illustration of various Deleuzean concepts, from the body without organs, the rhizome, logic of sense, and so forth, faciality, please read this book. Because the artist is always about 10 steps ahead of the philosopher, in my opinion. So this book, it illustrates how Francis Bacon's paintings, they really capture various Deleuzean concepts, but they do it in such a way that Francis Bacon can only be the quintessential and perfect Deleuzean artist. Because his approach to the subject, the singular nature of his subjects, the way that he contorts the flesh, the way that he doesn't paint narratives. He resists narrative, but he exposes intensities. Go and listen to the podcast, because me and Will, we go in depth into how Francis Bacon is the perfect Deleuzean artist. So, for example, we have one quote, and of course, this is about, in the introduction, this is about Cézanne. And Cézanne was a huge influence on Francis Bacon. I know that Blind Dweller, the YouTuber, has been doing a 3-part series on Francis Bacon that is recently completed. But here's one quote. Cézanne said that the painter must look beyond a landscape and its chaos. He spoke of the need to always paint at close range, to no longer see the wheat field, but to be close to it, to lose oneself in a landscape the way that Francis Bacon loses himself in a singular figure. Without landmarks, that's important, to the point where no one longer sees form or even matter, but only forces, densities, intensities. This is what Cézanne called the world before humanity. Dawn of ourselves, iridescent chaos, virginity of the world, a complete collapse of visual coordinates, and universal variation or interaction. Afterward, in the act of painting, the earth can emerge with its stubborn geometry, its geological foundations. So, Francis Bacon does something similar, but with the human subject. He paints landscapes out of the human subject. Now, he paints an exposure of forces and intensities. And this is very vital for Deleuze, especially the fact that he paints a very bare and naked and fleshy picture of the subject that is only felt through various, not emotions per se, but sensations. Terrifying sensations, but nevertheless, they expose something deeper about the human. But it resists any sort of narrative or storytelling or narrativization of those various forces. The way that Cézanne, through his very doubtful approach to painting, through always fidgeting, through always looking at the subject of the landscape and just doing a few dots and doing them all over the canvas, by resisting any sort of mark that can indicate a narrative in the landscape, by going back to the things themselves. It opens up so much potential in modern art and continental philosophy. So we talk about that. I think we begin with Cézanne and how Cézanne was such a huge influence on Francis Bacon, as Deleuze points out, because of the fact that he is almost what, it took Theoryceldom a century or more after Cézanne to talk about when it comes to quote unquote in phenomenology, and then later, object-oriented ontology, going back to the things themselves. Cézanne and then later Francis Bacon did this direct. So please, it's very interesting, very Theoryceldish, but me and Will, we try our best to sort of break it down. So please go and listen to it. I have also another article in the works in my series on the E-Right, but also I have this other article, as I mentioned on stream a few days ago, on Ayala and her, not going to get into that, but you'll have to wait and see. Go and listen to that podcast. Go and read The Logic of Sensation by Gilles Deleuze. If you truly want, I beg of you, if you truly want to understand Deleuze and even Guattari, read this. Don't read any preamble. This gives a very vivid, through the work of art, vivid picture of Deleuzean concepts. But of course, Theoryceldists don't know about that because they have a very negative approach to our work. Just in general. I mean, they may like to talk about it. They may like to point to various literary motifs. But the reality is that a lot of Theorycells, they have a very reductionistic view and the very instrumentalized view, ironically enough, of the work of art as just fulfilling various conceptual motifs. And it usually never leads anywhere. But Deleuze is different in that he deeply, deeply appreciates the works of Francis Bacon, and he sees in Bacon, I think, the direct representation, or rather, representations of problematic word in Deleuze, the direct depiction, which is different from representation, depiction of various concepts. And he does it in such a way that resists a mere one-to-one replication of them. He does it with verve. Anyways, like I always say, please like, share, subscribe, donate if you must. Go and give love and support to my friend Will. As always, God bless you one and all. Goodbye. Too sweet.